Hello there everyone, welcome to Nightmare Narratives. I am your storyteller and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Patrick O'Sullivan, but everyone calls me Paddy. I've been guiding folks through Carlsbad caverns for 11 years now, and I thought I'd seen every inch of these underground chambers. I was wrong. November 1955 was colder than usual. In New Mexico, the tourist season was winding down, and most of the seasonal staff had already headed home. Just a skeleton crew of us remained, me, Tom, the entrance guard, and Maria, who ran the gift shop. The caverns felt different when they were this empty. Sounds carried farther. Shadows seemed deeper. I grew up in Dublin before coming to America. Lost my whole family in a bombing when I was 26. My wife Sarah, my 2 little ones, and my parents. The pain nearly killed me. I came to these caves because I understood darkness. Before the war, I'd worked the coal mines back home. Underground felt familiar, safe even. Down here, the weight of rock above blocked out the noise of the world. Banshees were just Celtic nonsense my grandmother believed. I used to tell the tourists when they asked about Irish folklore, old wives' tales to scare children. I'd laugh and change the subject to limestone formations and bat colonies. That November morning started like any other. I was preparing for a small tour group, just 6 people who'd booked the extended cave exploration. Nothing fancy, just the usual route through the big room and back. But Mrs. Henderson from the group kept asking about the sealed passages. What's down there? She pointed to a metal gate blocking a narrow tunnel. Nothing worth seeing, I told her. Those chambers aren't safe for tourists. Old mining shafts and unstable rock. But something felt wrong that day. The air was colder than usual, and I kept hearing dripping sounds from places where there shouldn't be water. My flashlight beam seemed weaker, like the darkness was pushing back. The Apache who used to live around here had stories about these caves. They said spirits lived in the deepest chambers, that certain places underground should be left alone. The Spanish explorers wrote about hearing voices in the caves, women calling for help from passages that led nowhere. I always figured it was just the wind. Caves make strange sounds. Air pressure changes. Temperature shifts cause rocks to crack and settle. After 11 years underground, I knew every normal sound these caverns could make. But that morning, as I led the group through the king's palace, I heard something new. A sound like someone crying, very faint and far away. The tourists didn't seem to notice, too busy taking pictures and asking questions about the rock formations. The crying was coming from behind the sealed gate. I told myself it was just wind flowing through cracks in the rock. Underground air currents could create all sorts of sounds. But my grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. When you hear a woman weeping where no woman should be, death is coming. Patrick, the banshee knows. Nonsense, I thought. Just old superstitions. By lunch, I'd forgotten about the sound. But when I came back that afternoon to check the equipment storage room, I found something that made my blood run cold. Someone had scratched marks into the stone wall beside the sealed gate. Not random scratches, symbols, Celtic runes, just like the ones my grandmother used to draw in the dirt when she told her stories. The marks were fresh. The limestone dust was still white and bright, where sharp claws had carved deep grooves into solid rock. No one else had been down here. I had the only key. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those scratches in the stone. In the morning, I decided to check the sealed passage myself. I had a flashlight, rope, and my emergency radio. Standard procedure for checking unstable areas. The metal gate creaked as I opened it. The hinges were rusty, and it took some force to swing it wide enough to squeeze through. The tunnel beyond was narrow, barely wide enough for one person. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness ahead. I'd been in this passage before, years ago when I first started working here. It led to a small chamber that connected to some old mining shafts. Nothing dangerous if you were careful, but no reason for tourists to see it. 20 feet in, my flashlight beam caught something that shouldn't be there. Scratches covered both walls now, running the full length of the tunnel. The same Celtic symbols, carved deep into the rock. Some were old and darkened with moisture. Others looked fresh. At the end of the tunnel, the chamber opened up into a space about the size of a living room. My light played across the walls, and I saw more symbols everywhere, hundreds of them, some carved so deep they went several inches into the stone. Then I heard the crying again. It was louder here, echoing off the walls. A woman's voice, filled with grief so deep it made my chest hurt. The sound seemed to come from all directions at once, like it was built into the rock itself. "Hello," I called. "Is someone there? Are you hurt?" The crying stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own breathing and the steady drip of water. I swept my flashlight around the chamber again, looking for any sign of another person. The beam caught something white in a corner, a pile of old bones. Animal bones, I hoped, though some looked uncomfortably familiar. A sound like wind rushing through trees filled the chamber, though there was no air movement. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. My flashlight flickered. When I saw her, she stood in the far corner, just at the edge of my light. A woman in a white dress, her long dark hair hanging down like a curtain. She was too far away to see clearly, but something about her made my heart race. "Miss," I called. "How did you get down here?" She raised her head, and I caught a glimpse of her face, or where her face should have been. Empty eye sockets, black as cave mouths. Her mouth opened, and the most terrible sound I've ever heard came out. Not quite human, not quite animal. Pure grief made into sound. My flashlight died. In the absolute darkness, the wailing grew louder. It bounced off the walls, seeming to come from every direction. The sound reached inside my chest and squeezed my heart. I thought of Sarah, of my children, of the morning I came home to find nothing but rubble and smoke. Tears ran down my face. I hadn't cried for them in years. I fumbled for my spare flashlight, hands shaking when I got it working. The corner was empty, just stone walls and shadows. But carved into the rock where she had stood were new symbols, still bleeding limestone dust. I ran. Behind me, the wailing followed until I reached the metal gate and slammed it shut. Even then, I could hear it faintly, like someone sobbing very far away. Back in the main cavern, everything seemed normal, too normal. I radioed Tom at the entrance. "Tom, did anyone come down here today? Any unauthorized visitors?" "Negative, Paddy. Just you and the morning tour group." "Why?" I didn't know how to answer. "Just checking. Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine. That afternoon, Mrs. Henderson from the tour group called the park office. She'd developed her photographs from the cave visit, and one of them showed something impossible. In the background of a picture taken in the king's palace, you could see a white figure standing in a passage that should have been empty. A woman in a white dress with long dark hair. The same woman I'd seen in the sealed chamber. I didn't sleep for 3 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that terrible wailing. I started researching the history of the caves, looking for any explanation. What I found made things worse. Spanish explorers in the 1600s wrote about hearing women crying in the caves. Apache oral histories mentioned a spirit that warned of death, a woman who appeared before tragedy struck. Even the early park records from the 1920s mentioned unexplained acoustic phenomena and several cases of visitors becoming suddenly depressed after cave tours. More troubling were the death records. Over the past 30 years, there had been 17 suicides in the area around Carlsbad Caverns, all of them people who had visited the caves shortly before taking their own lives. All of them reported hearing a woman crying before they died. The 4th night, I was awakened by my radio crackling to life. "Paddy, ... Paddy, can you hear me?" It was Sarah's voice, my dead wife, calling to me through the radio. "Sarah." I grabbed the radio, hands shaking. "Sarah, is that you? I'm waiting for you. Patrick, in the deep places. Bring the children. We can be together again. The children are dead. Sarah, you're all dead. Not dead. Waiting so cold and dark here. Patrick, so lonely. Please come." The transmission ended in static. I was losing my mind. Had to be. Dead people don't talk on radios. But the next morning, I found Tom unconscious at the entrance station. He was alive, but wouldn't wake up. The medics who came to get him said he had all the signs of severe depression, the kind that sometimes led to suicide attempts. Tom had been working alone all night, right above the sealed passage. While they were loading Tom into the ambulance, I noticed something carved into the wooden doorframe of the entrance station. Celtic symbols, fresh cuts in the wood. She was moving up from the deep chambers. That afternoon, Maria didn't come to work. I found her at home, sitting in her kitchen, staring at nothing. She'd been crying for hours. I heard her last night, Maria whispered. A woman calling my name. She was so sad, Paddy. She made me remember Miguel. Miguel was Maria's husband who died in Korea 3 years ago. She told me to stop fighting the sadness. She said Miguel was waiting, and I could see him again if I just let go. I put Maria in my truck and drove her to the hospital in town. On the way, she kept talking about the woman in white. She has no eyes, Paddy, just empty holes, but she sees everything. She knows about your family in Dublin. She knows how much you miss them. My blood went cold. I'd never told Maria about Sarah and the children. At the hospital, the doctors said Maria was having a severe depressive episode. They kept her for observation. As I was leaving, one of the nurses stopped me. Strange thing, she said. We've had 3 other cases like this in the past week. All of them talking about hearing a crying woman. All of them mentioning someone named Patrick. Driving back to the park, I knew I had to face whatever was in those caves. People were getting hurt because of something I'd disturbed. The entity, whatever it was getting stronger, reaching farther from its underground home. But first, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I called my cousin Seamus in Boston. He was the family expert on the old stories, the keeper of grandmother's folklore. Patrick, he sounded surprised to hear from me. How are you, lad? Seamus, I need to ask you about banshees. Really ask. Not for tourists or jokes. His voice grew serious. What's happened? I told him everything. The crying, the woman in white, the symbols, what was happening to people around me. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Patrick, he finally said, you've awakened something that should have stayed sleeping. A banshee isn't just a fairy tale. It's a herald of death, yes, but more than that, it's a spirit that feeds on grief and despair. The more sorrow it causes, the stronger it becomes. How do I stop it? You can't kill it, but you can resist it. The banshee's power comes from making people give up hope. If you can hold on to something worth living for, it can't take you. I don't have anything left to live for, Seamus. Then you'd better find something fast, because it's coming for you next. That night, I went back to the sealed passage. I had to end this before anyone else got hurt. The gate stood open. I wasn't alone in the chamber this time. She was waiting for me. The banshee stood in the center of the room, more solid than before. I could see her clearly now, tall and thin, wearing a white dress that seemed to flow like water. Her face was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Where her eyes should have been were empty holes that seemed to go on forever. Patrick, she said, and her voice was Sarah's voice. You've come home at last. You're not Sarah. I am everyone you've lost, everyone you failed to save. Look at me, Patrick, really look. As I watched, her face changed. Now she looked like my daughter Emma, now like my son Tommy, now like my mother. We've been waiting so long, she said in my mother's voice. Waiting for you to stop pretending you want to live. You died with us in Dublin, Patrick. You just haven't admitted it yet. The chamber began to change around us. The walls dissolved, and I was standing in my old home in Dublin. Sarah was cooking at the stove, the children playing on the floor. Everything exactly as it had been the morning I left for work. The morning they died. Stay with us, Sarah said, turning to smile at me. No more pain, no more guilt, just peace. I took a step toward her. It would be so easy, so simple to let go, to stop carrying the weight of being the only one who survived. Then I heard something else. Voices calling from far away, faint and desperate. Help us, please. Someone help us. The illusion flickered. Through the walls of my Dublin home, I could see the truth. The chamber was filling with water, rising fast from an underground river. 3 people were trapped on a ledge, members of tomorrow's tour group who had somehow gotten lost in the caves. Ignore them, the banshee said, still wearing Sarah's face. They're not your responsibility. You've done enough. You've suffered. Enough. But they were my responsibility. I was a ranger. I was supposed to protect people, not abandon them to die. You're lying, I said. You're not Sarah. Sarah would never ask me to let innocent people die. The banshee's beautiful face twisted with rage. You choose them over us, over your own family. My family is dead, I said, and the words hurt like knives. They've been dead for 13 years, and they wouldn't want me to become a killer. In their memory, The entity shrieked, a sound that shattered the illusion and brought the chamber crashing back to reality. The water was real, and it was rising fast. The voices calling for help were real too. I grabbed my rope and dove into the flooded passage. The 3 tourists were trapped on a narrow ledge where the passage split into 2 tunnels. The water had risen so high they couldn't get back the way they'd come. "How did you get down here?" I shouted over the sound of rushing water. "The lady," one of them called back. The lady in white said there was a shortcut to the gift shop. The banshee had led them here to die, to add their deaths to the grief she fed on. I threw them the rope and started pulling them to safety one by one. The water kept rising. By the time I got the 3rd person across, it was up to my chest. Behind us, the banshee appeared again, but she looked different now, older, more decayed. Her white dress was stained and torn. "You cannot save them," she wailed. "You could not save your own family. You are a failure, Patrick O'Sullivan. You deserve to die with them." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. She was right. I had failed. Sarah and the children. I should have been home that morning. Should have protected them. "That's right," the banshee whispered. "Remember how it felt? The phone call, the smoke, the silence where their voices used to be." I was crying now, the old grief as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. But then I heard one of the tourists behind me, a young girl, maybe 8 years old. "Mister, are we going to be okay?" I looked at her scared face and thought of Emma. My Emma would want me to save this child. Sarah would want me to save all of them. "Yes," I told the girl, "we're going to be okay." I turned to face the banshee. I couldn't save my family, but I can save these people, and that matters. The entity screamed again, but it sounded weaker now, more distant. "I choose the living," I said. She faded like mist, her final words echoing off the walls. "This is not over, Patrick O'Sullivan. I know where to find you." The water began to recede. I led the tourists out through the rising passages, back to the main cavern in safety. The official report blamed the incident on flash flooding from an underground water source. The tourists were treated for mild hypothermia and sent home with Park Service apologies. The sealed passage was welded shut permanently. But I knew it wasn't over. The banshee had been right about one thing. She knew where to find me. Over the following weeks, I began to hear her voice in other places, not just in the caves anymore. She whispered to me from storm drains and basement windows. I saw her, reflection in dark water, always watching, always waiting. My hearing never fully recovered from that night in the chamber. The supernatural wailing had damaged something deep in my ears, but the partial hearing loss came with an unexpected gift, or curse. I could hear her now when she came for others, the faint wailing that meant someone was about to give up hope entirely. Someone was about to die. I couldn't go back to guiding tours. Being underground brought her too close. Instead, I started working with the families of people who'd lost loved ones, helping them process their grief, teaching them that surviving didn't mean forgetting. Sometimes I could save them. Sometimes I was too late, but I kept trying because I'd learned something important in that flooded chamber. The dead don't want us to join them. They want us to live, to love, to find meaning in the time we have left. The banshee still comes to me in dreams. She still wears Sarah's face sometimes, or the faces of my children. She still promises an end to the pain. But I've found something worth living for, the people I can still save, the hope I can still give. That's stronger than any grief, even one that walks and wails in the darkness. 3 months after the cave incident, I was having coffee in town when I heard it again, that faint crying that meant death was coming. I looked around and saw an old man sitting alone at a corner table, staring into his cup with the hollow expression I'd learned to recognize. I walked over and sat down across from him. "Beautiful day," I said. "Mind if I join you?" He looked up, surprised. His eyes had that distant look of someone who'd given up. "I suppose," he said quietly. We talked for an hour. About his wife who'd died the previous winter. About how empty his house felt. About how he wasn't sure he wanted to keep going. When he left, he was standing straighter. He'd promised to call his daughter to maybe visit his grandchildren next weekend. The crying sound had stopped. I can't save everyone. The banshee still wins sometimes. But every person who chooses to keep living, every moment of joy reclaimed from sorrow, that's a victory she can't take away. Some grief is too deep to bear, alone, but some company is worse than solitude. The trick is knowing the difference. My name is Rebecca Thornfield, but everyone calls me Becca. I need to tell you what happened to me in Olympic National Park during the winter of 1992. I know it sounds crazy. I know you probably won't believe me, but I have to tell someone, because what I saw out there is still hunting. I was 27 then, fresh out of college with a photography degree and stars in my eyes. Getting the ranger job at Olympic was like winning the lottery. The park was everything I'd dreamed of: endless green forests, misty mornings, and the kind of light that made my camera sing. I specialized in night photography, capturing the way moonlight filtered through the ancient trees. My supervisor, Dave Martinez, was a 20-year veteran who knew every trail by heart. "You picked a hell of a time to start," he told me on my first day in May. "Winter's coming, and this place gets dark. I mean really dark." I laughed it off. Growing up in Montana, I thought I knew dark. I was wrong. By December, I understood what Dave meant. The Pacific Northwest winter wrapped around the park like a wet, cold blanket. Fog rolled in from the ocean and never left. The sun barely peeked through the canopy, and by 4 in the afternoon, the forest was black as midnight. But I loved it. There's something magical about being alone in the wilderness with just your camera and the soft sound of dripping moss. The darkness didn't scare me, it inspired me. I'd been taking night shots for months, experimenting with long exposures and playing with shadows. "You're gonna burn out," Dave warned me. "All these night shifts aren't good for you." I've seen rangers go weird spending too much time alone in the dark. I brushed him off. I was young and stubborn, and I thought I could handle anything. The first sign something was wrong came from the photographers. Olympic attracts serious camera people, the kind who hike 10 miles for the perfect shot. In early December, 3 different groups came to the ranger station with the same complaint. "There are people in my photos who weren't there when I took them," said Jim Hartley, a nature photographer from Seattle. He showed me his prints, beautiful forest scenes ruined by dark figures that looked like people but weren't quite right. The figures were always in shadow, even when the rest of the photo was bright. They stood between trees or behind rocks, just dark enough that you couldn't make out faces or details. But they were definitely human-shaped, probably just shadows. "From branches," I told Jim. "Sometimes the eye sees patterns that aren't really there." But as more photographers came forward with similar images, I started to worry. These were professionals with expensive equipment. They knew the difference between shadows and people. I decided to investigate myself. On December 15th, I hiked out to the most reported area, a stretch of old-growth forest about 5 miles from headquarters. The trees there were massive, some over 500 years old, with trunks so wide it would take 6 people holding hands to circle them. The place felt wrong from the moment I arrived. The usual forest sounds, birds, small animals, wind through leaves, were muted. Even my footsteps seemed quieter, like the darkness was swallowing sound. I set up my camera and started shooting. Through the viewfinder, everything looked normal, but when I developed the film back at the station, there they were, dark figures standing just at the edge of my shots. My hands shook as I examined the photos with a magnifying glass. The figures cast no shadows of their own. In fact, the shadows around them seemed darker, deeper than they should be. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those photos, about the wrongness I'd felt in the forest. Dave had gone home to his family in town, leaving me alone at the station. The building creaked and settled around me, but every sound made me jump. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps outside. I grabbed my flashlight and peered out the window. Nothing but darkness and falling mist. The footsteps stopped. "Hello," I called out, opening the front door. "Anyone there?" My voice died in the thick air. I swept my flashlight beam across the clearing, but it barely penetrated 10 feet into the darkness. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a shape that pulled back from the light like it was burned by it. "Just trees," I whispered to myself. "Just trees moving in the wind." But there was no wind. I went back inside and locked the door, feeling foolish. I was letting the photographer's stories get to me. There had to be a logical explanation. The next morning, Dave found tracks around the ranger station. Human footprints, but wrong somehow. They were too long and narrow, and they only appeared in the shadowy areas under the eaves. Where the morning sun hit the ground, there were no prints at all. "Kids messing around," Dave said, but his voice was tight. "Maybe campers." In December, in this weather, he didn't answer. That afternoon, I got the call that changed everything. Sarah Chen, a day hiker, had been found unconscious on the Ho River Trail. The EMTs were bringing her out, but something was very wrong. I met the ambulance at the trailhead. Sarah was awake, but not really there. Her eyes stared at nothing, and she wouldn't stop shivering, despite being wrapped in blankets. But the strangest thing was her shadow, or rather, the complete lack of one. Even under the bright ambulance lights, Sarah cast no shadow at all. The EMTs didn't seem to notice, but I couldn't look away from the wrongness of it. A person without a shadow looked like a hole in the world. What happened to her? I asked the lead EMT. Exposure, probably, maybe hypothermia, but her body temperature is normal, and she has no signs of frostbite. It's weird. Sarah was taken to the hospital in Port Angeles. I never saw her again, but I heard she never recovered. She spent the rest of her life in a care facility, staring at nothing, unable to speak. That night, I couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. I called Dave at home. Something's wrong with this place, I told him. The photos, the tracks. Now Sarah, stop. His voice was sharp. Don't go down that road, Becca. I've seen good rangers lose their minds chasing shadows. But what if they're not just shadows? The line was quiet for a long moment. Then Dave said, stay inside tonight. Don't go out alone anymore. I'll be there first thing in the morning. I hung up and checked all the locks twice. Outside, the darkness pressed against the windows like something alive. I turned on every light in the station and tried to read, but the words swam on the page. Around midnight, the lights went out. The darkness was absolute, thicker than anything I'd ever experienced. I fumbled for my flashlight, but when I clicked it on, the beam seemed weak and small. It was like the darkness was fighting back, swallowing the light. That's when I heard the whisper. Rebecca. It came from right outside the window, soft as breath but clear as day. My name, spoken by something that shouldn't know it. I pressed myself against the far wall, clutching my flashlight like a weapon. The whisper came again, closer now. Rebecca, come outside. The voice was neither male nor female, neither old nor young. It was the sound of absence, of something that existed in the spaces between things. I stayed frozen until dawn, when the darkness finally retreated and the normal sounds of the forest returned. Dave found me there, still pressed against the wall, flashlight dead in my hands. You look like hell, he said. I told him about the voice, about Sarah's missing shadow, about the feeling that something was hunting in our woods. Dave listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. My grandfather was Macca, he finally said. He told stories about things that lived in the deep woods. Shadow walkers, he called them. Things that fed on what made people human. You believe me? I believe something killed Sarah Chen without laying a finger on her. And I believe it's not done. Dave pulled out a file folder I'd never seen before. Inside were reports going back decades. Hikers found dead with no apparent cause. Campers discovered catatonic, and always the same details. No shadows, no signs of struggle, bodies that seemed empty, like something vital had been drained away. Why didn't you tell me about this before? I asked. Because knowing about it makes you a target, Dave said. These things, whatever they are, they're drawn to people who can see them clearly. And photographers, you see everything through a lens. You notice shadows and light better than anyone. He was right. Even as we talked, I found myself studying the shadows in the room, looking for movement that shouldn't be there. What do we keep people out of the deep woods until spring? Post warnings about dangerous conditions, hope it goes dormant when the days get longer. But it was already too late. That evening, a family of 4 went missing from the Quinault area. The Hendersons' mum, dad, and 2 teenage kids. Their campsite was found intact, but there were no signs of struggle, just for sleeping bags and a cold fire. We organized search parties, but every team that went into the deep woods came back shaken. They reported strange sounds, glimpses of movement, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. More than one volunteer quit on the spot. On the second day of searching, we found Tommy Henderson. He was sitting under a massive cedar tree, staring at nothing with the same empty expression as Sarah Chen. But Tommy was different. He could still talk, sort of. He spoke in whispers, like he was afraid something might hear him. It took them into the dark, he said when I knelt beside him. Mum and Dad and Lisa. Took them, but it left me. Said I could carry a message. What message, Tommy? He looked at me with eyes that seemed far too old for his 15-year-old face. It knows you, Rebecca. It's been watching you. It likes how you see in the dark. My blood turned cold. Where are your parents? Where's Lisa? In the spaces between the trees, in the shadows that move wrong. It keeps them there, and it drinks them slow. We got Tommy to the hospital, but like Sarah, he never really came back. He spent his remaining years drawing pictures of shadows with eyes, shadows that reached out with arms too long for any human. The search for his family continued for another week, but we never found them. The case officially became a missing persons investigation, though everyone knew they were dead. I started carrying more lights, a headlamp, 2 flashlights, flares, even a camping lantern. Dave noticed but didn't comment. He was doing the same thing. The entity was getting bolder. Rangers working night shifts reported equipment failures, radios going dead, flashlights dimming, vehicle headlights flickering. Always in the areas where the photographs had shown those dark figures. I began to understand the pattern. The thing was testing our defenses, learning our routines. It moved through shadows like we moved through air, and it was mapping our territory. The worst part was my own shadow. I first noticed it during a routine patrol near the Ho River. I stopped to check my compass, and when I looked down, my shadow was facing the wrong direction. While I looked north, my shadow pointed south. I spun around, and my shadow spun with me, but a half-second too late, like it was copying my movements instead of being caused by them. From that day forward, I couldn't trust my own shadow. Sometimes it moved independently, reaching toward dark spaces when I wasn't moving at all. Other times it would be missing entirely, leaving me feeling hollow and exposed. Dave noticed during our evening briefing, "Becca, where's your shadow?" I looked down. Despite the bright fluorescent lights overhead, I cast no shadow at all. "It's taking me," I whispered, piece by piece. That night, the shadow walker came. For me, directly. I was alone at the station, trying to stay awake under every light I could find. When the darkness outside began to move, it flowed like liquid, pouring between the trees and pooling around the building. The lights inside began to dim, one by one. The fluorescence flickered and died. My lantern dimmed to a weak glow. Even my flashlight seemed to be losing power. Through the window, I saw it clearly for the first time. 9 feet tall and shaped like a human stretched too thin. It was made of absolute darkness, not just the absence of light, but something that consumed light, that pulled illumination into itself and devoured it. Where its face should be was a depth that hurt to look at, like staring into a hole in the universe. It pressed against the window, and the glass began to frost over, despite the mild December weather. When it spoke, I heard the voice inside my head rather than through my ears. "Come outside, Rebecca. Come into the dark where you belong." I backed toward the center of the room, holding my dying flashlight like a shield. The shadow walker flowed around the building, testing every window and door. Everywhere it touched, the light grew weaker. "You see us so clearly," it whispered. "In my mind, your pictures capture our essence. You understand shadow and light better than most humans. You would make a perfect addition to our number." "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said aloud, though my voice shook. The thing that might have been laughter echoed in my skull. "You think you have a choice? Look at yourself." Rebecca looked closely. I glanced down and nearly screamed. My shadow wasn't just acting independently now, it was detaching from me entirely, like smoke peeling away from fire. Pieces of my shadow were drifting toward the windows, toward the creature outside. "Every photograph you've taken in our territory has fed us," the shadow walker continued. "Every night you've spent alone in the darkness has made us stronger. You've been ours for months. We've just been waiting for the right time to collect." The building shuddered as more shadow walkers emerged from the forest. I could see them through the frosted windows, dozens of them, all flowing darkness and impossible height. They surrounded the ranger station completely. My radio crackled to life, filled with static and Dave's panicked voice. "Becca, Becca, are you there? The whole park's gone dark. Power's out everywhere, and we're getting reports of the radio died." Outside, the shadow walkers pressed closer. My flashlight dimmed to almost nothing. In desperation, I grabbed the emergency flares from the supply closet and lit one. The red light flared bright, and the shadow walkers recoiled like I'd struck them. Their whispered voices turned to hisses of pain and anger. "Light," I breathed. "You can't stand real light." I lit another flare, then another, filling the room with harsh red illumination. The creatures pulled back from the windows, but they didn't retreat far. They waited just beyond the light's reach, patient as death. But flares don't last forever. I had maybe 20 minutes before they burned out, and then I'd be defenseless. I tried to think like a photographer, analyzing light and shadow. The shadow walkers weren't just dark, they were anti-light. They didn't cast shadows because they absorbed all photons that touched them. But that meant they had to be vulnerable. Too intense. Direct illumination. The camera flash unit in my bag was powerful, designed for nature photography. If I could get close enough, the first flare sputtered and died. The shadow walkers pressed closer. I lit 2 more flares and moved toward my camera bag. The lead shadow walker, the one that had spoken to me, oozed partially through the wall. Where it passed through, the wood blackened and cracked. "Your light is temporary," it whispered. "Our darkness is eternal." I pulled out my camera and attached the most powerful flash unit I owned. My hands shook as I adjusted the settings for maximum output. The second flare died. Then the third. The shadow walkers flowed into the room like a tide of living darkness. The temperature plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs as they surrounded me. I raised the camera and triggered the flash. The explosion of light was incredible, far brighter than any flare. The shadow walkers shrieked, a sound like reality tearing. The lead creature stumbled backward. Parts of its darkness burned away by the intense illumination. But the flash only lasted a fraction of a second. As soon as it ended, they surged forward again. I triggered it again and again. The camera's battery was draining fast, but each flash drove them back a little further. I could see damage now, holes burned. In their darkness, like acid eating through fabric, the camera died. In the sudden darkness, the shadow walkers closed in. I felt their cold touch on my skin, felt pieces of myself being pulled away like smoke. My vision dimmed. My thoughts grew sluggish. Then I heard the roar of engines outside. Dave's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Becca, get down." Blinding white light flooded through every window as 3 Park Service vehicles trained, their high-powered searchlights on the building. The shadow walkers screamed and fled, dissolving into mist in the face of so much concentrated illumination. Dave and 2 other rangers burst through the door, flashlights blazing. They found me collapsed on the floor, my shadow completely gone. "Jesus, Becca, what happened here?" I tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled. "How do you describe something that exists in the spaces between photons? How do you explain creatures made of living absence?" They helped me outside, where I collapsed again at the sight of the forest. Every tree, every bush, every blade of grass was casting multiple shadows, all pointing toward me. The official report blamed the incident on a gas leak that caused hallucinations. The missing hikers were listed as victims of exposure during an unexpected weather event. The photographs showing dark figures were explained as camera malfunctions caused by moisture damage. I knew better, but I couldn't prove anything. Who would believe that creatures made of living darkness were hunting in our national parks? I tried to return to work, but it was impossible. Even in bright daylight, I cast no shadow. Worse, I was becoming photosensitive. Normal sunlight burned my skin like I was a vampire. I had to wear sunglasses indoors and sleep with every light in my apartment turned on. The nightmares were the worst part. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadow walkers watching me from between the trees. I felt their cold touch trying to pull away what remained of my humanity. Dave visited me in the hospital after my nervous breakdown. He sat beside my bed in the harsh fluorescent light that had become my constant companion. "It's not over, is it?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "They marked me. I can feel them out there, waiting. Waiting for what? For my light to burn out completely. Then I'll become one of them." Dave was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "My grandfather told me something else about the shadow walkers. He said some people who encountered them and lived became guardians, people who could see them coming and warn others. Is that what I am now? A guardian, maybe. Or maybe you're just someone who survived something impossible." I left the Park Service after that, moved to Phoenix, where it's sunny 300 days a year. I work in a photo lab now, developing other people's pictures. Sometimes I see things in the shadows that shouldn't be there, and I make sure those photos never make it to the customers. I monitor missing persons reports from national parks across the country. The pattern is always the same: people vanishing without a trace during the darkest months of the year. Bodies found drained of something essential. Survivors who speak of whispers in the darkness. I try to warn people when I can. Park rangers mostly ignore me. One crazy ex-ranger's paranoid theories, but sometimes they listen. Sometimes they increase patrols during new moon phases or post warnings about hiking alone after dark. It's not enough though. The shadow walkers are patient. They've been hunting in the deep woods since before humans had words for darkness. They'll be there long after our lights burn out. But I keep fighting them the only way I know how, with light, with vigilance, and with the hope that someone will believe me before it's too late. Because they're still out there, in every national park, every deep forest, every place where shadows gather thick between the trees. They're waiting for people like me, people who see too clearly, who spend too much time alone in the dark, and every day my own light grows a little dimmer. If you're reading this, if you're planning to visit any remote wilderness area, remember what I've told you. Stay in groups, carry multiple light sources, never hike alone after sunset. And if you see your shadow acting strange, if you notice dark figures in your photographs that weren't there when you took the shot, get out immediately. Don't investigate. Don't try to be brave. Some darkness hunts back. My name is William Standing Bear, but everyone calls me Bill. I've been a ranger at Badlands National Park for 16 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these ancient hills could throw at me. Rattlesnakes, flash floods, tourists who think they can hike 20 miles in flip-flops. You name it, I've dealt with it, but I was wrong, dead wrong. It was July 1964, and the summer heat was hitting us hard. The temperature hadn't dropped below 90 degrees in 2 weeks, and the rock formations were so hot you could fry an egg on them. Not that anyone would want to eat anything out here. The smell of ancient sediment and dust gets into everything. I was making my morning rounds when I spotted the university trucks parked near Devil's Canyon. The paleontology team from the University of Nebraska had been working the fossil beds for 3 weeks, and Dr. Marcus Webb, their lead scientist, had promised to keep me updated on their progress. We'd had problems before with amateur fossil hunters damaging the site, so I kept a close eye on all the dig operations. The thing is, I understood both sides of the fossil debate better than most people realized. My grandfather, Joseph Standing Bear, had been a tribal elder who knew the old stories about the sacred burial grounds scattered throughout the Badlands. But I also had a geology degree from the University of South Dakota, so I knew the scientific value of the prehistoric bones buried in these layers of rock. Walking up to the dig site, I noticed something odd. The usual sounds were missing. No voices calling out discoveries, no scraping of tools against stone, no diesel generator humming. In the background, just silence, broken only by the wind whistling through the rock formations. "Dr. Webb," I called out, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Everything okay up here?" No answer. I climbed the narrow path to the main excavation area, my boots crunching on loose gravel. The site looked wrong somehow, though I couldn't put my finger on what bothered me. The tools were scattered around like the team had dropped everything and left in a hurry. Canvas tarps flapped in the wind, and there were papers blowing around that should have been secured. That's when I saw the bones. Not the usual dinosaur fossils they'd been uncovering. These were different, newer. Some of them looked almost human. I knelt down beside one of the excavation squares and felt my stomach drop. Mixed in with the 60-million-year-old fossils were bones that definitely didn't belong. Human ribs, a skull fragment, what looked like a femur, but they were arranged in a pattern that made no geological sense, like someone had carefully placed them among the ancient remains. The radio on my belt crackled to life. "Bill, you copy?" It was Janet from the visitor center. I fumbled for the radio, my hands suddenly shaky. "Yeah, I'm here. We've got a situation. Dr. Webb called in about an hour ago, said they needed medical assistance. Ambulance is on the way, but they're asking for you specifically." Medical assistance. What happened? He wouldn't say. Just kept talking about bones and asking if he knew anything about Lakota burial practices. Sounded pretty shaken up. I looked down at the strange bone arrangement again, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I heard something, a low humming sound, almost like singing. But when I held my breath to listen, there was nothing but wind. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. "The ancestors' bones are not meant for digging, William. Some things should stay buried." I'd always figured those were just old stories, tales meant to keep people from disturbing important sites. But standing there in the morning heat, looking at bones that shouldn't exist, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Fear. The ambulance arrived 30 minutes later, kicking up clouds of dust as it wound through the canyon road. I met them at the base of the dig site, where Dr. Webb was sitting on a rock with his head in his hands. His usually neat appearance was disheveled shirt, torn, face pale, hands shaking. "Bill, thank God you're here," he said, looking up at me with wide, frightened eyes. "Something's not right about this place. Something's very wrong." "What happened, Doc?" I asked, signaling the paramedics to give us a moment. "It's Tomitami Hernandez, one of my graduate students. We found him this morning at the bottom of the excavation pit, unconscious. But that's not the worst part." Webb's voice dropped to a whisper. "His bones, Bill. Something's wrong with his bones." The paramedics were already working on a young man who looked to be in his early 20s. Even from a distance, I could see something was off. The kid was awake but seemed unable to support his own weight, like all the strength had been drained from his body. "His x-rays are going to show something impossible," Webb continued. "I've been studying bones for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this. It's like his skeleton is dissolving." I helped the paramedics load Tommy into the ambulance, and I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he grabbed my arm. Pure terror. "The bones are singing," he whispered. "Do you hear them singing?" After the ambulance left, I walked the dig site with Dr. Webb. He showed me where they'd found Tommy, and I had to admit it looked strange. The excavation pit was perfectly circular, about 8 feet across, and the walls were lined with bones, not just fossil bones, but a mixture of ancient and modern remains, all arranged in intricate patterns. "We didn't arrange them like this," Webb insisted. "Yesterday, this was just a standard excavation grid. We came back this morning and found Tommy unconscious in the center, surrounded by ... This I knelt down and examined the bone arrangements more closely. There were definitely human remains mixed in with the dinosaur fossils, but they were positioned in a way that reminded me of something from my childhood. My grandmother used to make medicine wheels out of stones and bones, circular patterns that were supposed to have spiritual significance." "Doc, have you been working at night?" "No, absolutely not. We always pack up by sunset. Too dangerous to work in the dark." "Then how do you explain this?" I pointed to the fresh excavation. "Marks around the pit. Someone's been digging here recently. The soil's been turned over, and these tool marks are fresh." Webb looked confused. "That's impossible. We have all the tools accounted for, and my team was back at the motel by 6 o'clock. That's when I heard it again, that low humming sound, like a song being sung in a language I didn't recognize. But this time, I wasn't the only one who heard it." "What is that?" Webb asked, looking around nervously. The sound seemed to be coming from the bone arrangements themselves, a vibration that I could feel in my chest as much as hear with my ears. And as we stood there listening, I swear I saw some of the smaller bones shift slightly, as if they were trying to move. "We need to get out of here," I said, but Webb was already backing toward the trail. "This is a significant archaeological discovery," he protested weakly. "We can't just abandon the site." But even as he spoke, I could see the fear in his eyes. Whatever was happening here wasn't natural, and we both knew it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Tommy's words. "The bones are singing." I'd grown up hearing stories about bone speakers, Lakota spiritual leaders who could communicate with the dead through their remains. My grandfather had been one of them, though he'd never talked about it much around me. Around midnight, I gave up on sleep and drove back to the park. I told myself I was just doing a routine security check, but the truth was, I needed to see that dig site again. Something was drawing me back there, like a voice calling my name. The moon was full, casting strange shadows across the Badlands. I parked at the bottom of the canyon and climbed the path with just a flashlight for guidance. The dig site was exactly as we'd left it, but something felt different. The bones were humming again, louder this time, and in the moonlight, I could see them moving, not just shifting, but actually repositioning themselves into new patterns. As I watched, frozen in place, the circular arrangement began to change, bones sliding across the ground with a soft clicking sound. They were spelling something. Letters formed from fragments of ribs and vertebrae, words written in a language that was both ancient and familiar. All bones belonged to the earth. I ran back to my truck and didn't stop until I was safely locked inside, but even then, I could hear the singing, growing louder and more insistent, like a choir of the dead welcoming me home. I called in sick the next day, something I hadn't done in 5 years. But I needed time to think, to figure out what I'd seen and what it meant. I drove to the reservation to visit my uncle, Charlie Standing Bear, who still kept some of the old ways alive. Charlie listened to my story without interruption, his weathered face growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, staring out at the prairie grass swaying in the wind. "Your grandfather saw something like this once," he finally said. 1943, during the war, government surveyors were mapping the area for some military project, and they started digging where they shouldn't have. Found a burial ground that had been there for over 1,000 years. What happened? The bone spoke to him, told him the surveyors were in danger, that something was protecting the dead from being disturbed. 3 of them died before the project was shut down. Heart attacks, the official report said, but your grandfather knew better. Charlie pulled out an old leather pouch from his jacket. Inside were sage bundles and what looked like small animal bones carved with symbols. He gave me these before he died. Said if the bone spirits ever returned, I'd know what to do with them. He handed me the pouch. Sounds like that time has come. I wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but I couldn't forget what I'd seen. The moving bones, the messages spelled out in ancient remains, the way Tommy had looked like something had been drained from his very core. When I got back to the park, Janet was waiting for me at the visitor center with bad news. Dr. Webb called they had to take another one of his students to the hospital. Sarah Mitchell, the young woman who was cataloging the fossil finds. Same symptoms as Tommy, severe bone density loss, but it happened overnight. How is that possible? The doctors don't know. They're calling it a rare metabolic disorder, but Webb thinks it's connected to the dig site. He wants to meet with you as soon as possible. I found Webb and his remaining team members, just 2 graduate students, now huddled around a camp table covered with x-rays and medical reports. The man looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 days. "Look at this," he said, holding up an x-ray. "This is Sarah's leg bone from her physical exam 3 weeks ago. Perfect bone density, completely normal for a healthy 20. He held up another x-ray. "This is from yesterday. Same bone, same person. Look at the difference." I didn't need a medical degree to see what he meant. The bone in the second x-ray looked hollow, almost transparent, like it had been eaten away from the inside. "It's impossible," Webb continued. "Bone density loss like this should take months or years, not hours. And both Tommy and Sarah were working directly with the bone arrangements when they became ill. I think something at the dig site is causing this. Have you considered shutting down the excavation? The university won't let us. Too much invested in the project, and we haven't found anything they consider dangerous. Just some unusual bone formations that could be explained by natural geological processes. But I knew it wasn't natural." That night, I returned to the dig site with Charlie's pouch of sacred items. I had to see for myself what was happening, and maybe find a way to stop it. The bones were active again, rearranging themselves into new patterns under the moonlight. But this time, there was something else, a presence moving among them, a shadow that seemed to be made of bones itself. At first, I thought it was just the moonlight playing tricks on my eyes, but as I watched from the edge of the excavation area, the shadow grew more solid, more defined, 12 feet tall, constructed from bones of different sizes and time periods. It moved with a purpose that was both ancient and intelligent. The creature, and that's what it was, I realized, turned toward me as if it had been aware of my presence all along. Its skull was a mixture of human and animal features, and its eyes were empty sockets that somehow managed to convey emotion, recognition, hunger. It raised one skeletal arm and pointed directly at me, and I felt something cold and invasive probe at my chest, like icy fingers exploring my rib cage. The sensation was so real, so physical, that I looked down expecting to see my shirt torn open. But there was nothing visible, just the feeling of something foreign, examining my bones from the inside. Then it spoke, not with a voice but with a sound like wind through dried leaves. "William Standing Bear, your bones remember the old songs." I fumbled for Charlie's pouch, pulling out a bundle of sage and a small carved bone. The creature watched, with what might have been amusement, as I tried to remember the words my grandfather had taught me for speaking to the dead. "I don't want to disturb you," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "The digging can stop. The bones can be uttered." The creature tilted its skull, considering my words. Then it gestured toward the excavation pit, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. Dr. Webb was there, unconscious in the center of the bone circle. But unlike Tommy and Sarah, he wasn't just lying there. His body was slowly sinking into the earth, as if the ground itself was pulling him down. And I could see his bones beginning to show through his skin, glowing with a faint, sickly light. "The trespassers will join the collection," the creature said. "All bones belong to the earth." I jumped into the pit and grabbed Webb's shoulders, trying to pull him free. But it was like trying to lift someone caught in quicksand. The more I pulled, the deeper he seemed to sink. That's when I understood what the creature really was. Not just a guardian of the dead, but a collector. It was taking the bones from the living, adding them to its ancient hoard, and once it had them, they would never be free. The creature moved closer, its hollow eyes fixed on me. I could feel that cold, probing sensation again, stronger this time, as if it was deciding whether I was worth adding to its collection. "Your bones are strong," it said. "They will make good additions." I lit the sage bundle with shaking hands, holding it between us like a shield. The creature paused, studying the smoke with something that might have been respect. "You know the old ways," it acknowledged, "but you also serve the bone thieves. You cannot protect both the living and the dead." It was right, and we both knew it. I was caught between two worlds: my duty as a park ranger to protect the visitors and researchers, and my heritage as a Lakota who should have known better than to let outsiders disturb sacred ground. The creature extended one skeletal hand toward me, and I felt an overwhelming urge to take it, to let it guide me into the bone circle where I belonged. But then I heard Webb groan, and I knew I had to choose. I threw the sage bundle directly at the creature's skull and pulled Webb free of the pit. Just as the ground collapsed where he'd been lying, the creature let out a sound like breaking glass, and for a moment its bone construction scattered before reassembling itself. But the distraction was enough. I got Webb to his feet and half carried, half dragged him away from the dig site. Behind us, I could hear the creature's voice calling after us. "You cannot run from what you are, William, standing bare. Your bones will come home eventually." The next morning, I convinced Webb to evacuate the site temporarily while I figured out how to handle the situation. He was shaken enough to agree, especially after I showed him the collapsed excavation pit and the bone arrangements that had rearranged themselves overnight. But I knew the creature wasn't finished. As long as the dig site remained active, as long as there were bones to collect, it would continue hunting. And I was starting to understand that it had marked me specifically, not just as another victim, but as something else entirely. I spent the day researching everything I could find about Lakota burial practices and bone spirits. The more I learned, the more I realized that my grandfather had been preparing me for this my entire life. The stories he'd told me, the traditional practices he'd insisted I learn, even my choice to become a park ranger, it was all connected. That evening, I returned to the dig site alone. I needed to confront the creature directly, to find out what it really wanted from me. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the Badlands, and I could already hear the bones singing in the distance. The creature was waiting for me, standing in the center of what had once been the excavation pit. But now, the entire area was filled with bones, thousands of them, arranged in complex patterns that seemed to shift and change in the dying light. "You came back," it said, its voice carrying better now, more human-like. "I knew you would. What do you want from me? You are the last of the bone speakers in your family line. Your grandfather could hear us, but he chose to turn away. You have the same gift, but you also have the education to understand both worlds." I looked around at the vast collection of bones surrounding us. "These aren't just from the dig site, are they? I have been collecting for centuries. Every bone that has ever been disturbed from its proper resting place, every skeleton that has been pulled from the earth for display or study. They all come to me eventually, and you want me to help you. I want you to choose. Continue serving those who would disturb the dead for their own purposes, or accept your role as a guardian of the bones. Help me return them to their proper rest." It was an impossible choice, but I was starting to understand that it wasn't really about the bones at all. It was about respect for the dead, for the ancient ways, for the balance between the living and the dead that had been disrupted by modern excavation techniques. "If I help you," I said carefully, "what happens to the living people who have been affected? Tommy, Sarah, Dr. Webb. Their bones will be returned to them, but the digging must stop. All of it. Forever." I thought about my grandfather's words, about the stories he'd told me about the bone spirits. They weren't evil, Exactly, they were guardians, protectors of the dead, who had been disturbed by the living. But they were also relentless. In their purpose, there has to be another way, I said. Some compromise. The creature moved closer, and I could see that its construction was even more complex than I'd realized. Bones from different time periods, different species, all held together by some force I couldn't understand. Look around you. William's standing bare. This is what compromise has brought us. Centuries of bones stolen from their rest, displayed in museums, sold to collectors, buried in university storage rooms. The dead have been patient long enough. It raised one arm, and I felt that cold probing sensation again, stronger than before. This time, I could actually see my bones beginning to glow beneath my skin, responding to the creature's call. Your bones, remember the old songs, it said. Let them sing. I felt myself being pulled toward the bone circle, my feet moving without my conscious control. The creature's power was overwhelming, and I realized that I'd been marked from the moment I first set foot on the dig site. But then I remembered something my grandfather had taught me, not just about respecting the dead, but about fighting for the living. The bone speakers weren't just guardians of the dead. They were bridges between the worlds, responsible for maintaining balance. I pulled out the carved bone from Charlie's pouch and held it up between us. The creature paused, studying the symbols carved into its surface. You know what this is? I asked. A bone speaker's token. Your grandfather's. And you know what it means? For the first time, the creature seemed uncertain. It means you have the right to speak for both the living and the dead. Then listen to me. The digging will stop, but not the way you want. I'll make sure the sacred sites are protected, that the bones are treated with respect. But I won't help you murder innocent people. The creature's eyes flared with anger. The bone thieves are not innocent. They're ignorant, not evil. They don't understand what they're doing, but they can learn. Give me time to educate them, to change how these excavations are conducted. Time. How much time have the dead been waiting for justice? I could feel the creature's power pressing against me, trying to overwhelm my resistance. But I held firm, remembering my grandfather's words about the bone speaker's responsibility to maintain balance. 1 year, I said. Give me 1 year to shut down the commercial fossil hunting and establish proper protocols for sacred sites. If I can't do it, then I'll join your collection willingly. The creature considered this for a long moment. Around us, the bones were singing louder, more urgently, as if they were debating among themselves. Finally, it nodded. 1 year, but if you fail, William standing bare, you will take their place. Your bones will sing with ours forever. Agreed. The creature reached out and touched the carved bone in my hand. I felt a jolt of energy, like being struck by lightning, and suddenly I could hear the bones singing clearly, not just as noise, but as voices. Thousands of voices speaking in languages both ancient and modern. They were telling me their stories, sharing their pain at being disturbed, their anger at being forgotten. But they were also telling me something else, that they trusted me to find a better way. When the sensation faded, the creature was gone. The vast collection of bones had vanished, leaving only the original excavation site and the scattered tools of the paleontology team. But I knew it wasn't over. The creature was still out there, still watching, still waiting to see if I would keep my promise. And I could feel something else change in my own bones, a connection to the ancient songs that I'd never experienced. Before, I was truly a bone speaker now, with all the responsibilities that came with that role. The year that followed was the hardest of my life. I had to learn how to balance my duties as a park ranger with my new role as a bone speaker, and it wasn't easy. The creature had been right about one thing: most people didn't understand or respect the sacred nature of the burial sites. I started by working with Dr. Webb, who was surprisingly receptive to changing his excavation methods after his encounter with the creature. We developed new protocols for fossil hunting that included consultation with tribal elders and proper ceremonies before any digging began. Tommy and Sarah recovered fully once the excavations stopped, though they both left the field of paleontology permanently. Sarah became a teacher, and Tommy went into environmental law. They never talked about what happened to them, but I could see the knowledge in their eyes whenever we met. The hardest part was dealing with the university administrators and government officials who controlled the fossil hunting permits. Many of them saw the sacred site restrictions as obstacles to scientific progress, and it took months of negotiation and political pressure to get them to agree to the new protocols. But I had help. Charlie introduced me to other tribal elders who had been fighting these battles for decades, and together we formed a coalition to protect sacred sites throughout the region. We also worked with sympathetic scientists who understood that respecting indigenous traditions didn't have to mean abandoning research entirely. The bone creature kept its word. I never saw it again, but I could feel its presence sometimes, watching from the shadows, waiting to see if I would succeed, and I could still hear the bones singing, though not as loudly as before. On the anniversary of our agreement, I returned to the dig site alone. The area had been officially closed to fossil hunting and designated as a protected sacred site. Native grasses were already beginning to reclaim the disturbed earth. I placed a bundle of sage in the center of where the excavation pit had been and lit it with a match. The smoke rose straight up in the still air, carrying my words to whatever spirits might be listening. "The bones are safe," I said. "The dead are protected. The covenant is kept." There was no response, but I felt a sense of peace settle over the area that hadn't been there before. The creature had accepted my success, and the threat was ended. But my role as a bone speaker was just beginning. Over the following years, I would help establish similar protections for sacred sites throughout the region, working with scientists and tribal leaders to find ways to balance research with respect for indigenous traditions. I also discovered that my encounter with the creature had changed me in ways I was still learning to understand. My bones had become more sensitive to the presence of the dead, and I could sometimes hear their voices when I walked through old burial grounds or historic sites. It was a gift and a burden, but I'd learned to accept both. My grandfather had been right: some things are more important than the curiosity of the living, and the dead have claims that transcend our desire for knowledge. The Badlands are quiet now, at least on the surface. The tourists still come to see the ancient rock formations and hunt for fossils in the approved areas. But those of us who know the truth understand that we're walking on sacred ground, and we treat it with the respect it deserves. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I can still hear the bones singing. But now their song is one of peace rather than anger, and I know that the dead are finally at rest. The creature is still out there, still watching, still protecting. But it no longer hunts the living, because the living have learned to respect the dead. And I continue my work as a bone speaker, maintaining the balance between two worlds, making sure that the voices of the dead are never forgotten again, because the bones remember everything, and they're always listening, always watching, always waiting to make sure we never disturb their rest again. My name is Jennifer Blackthorne, but everyone calls me Jenny. I've been a park ranger for 5 years now, working in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. Before this job, I was a nurse in a mental hospital. I learned a lot about how people's minds work, especially when they're scared or confused. The fall of 1980 was beautiful in the mountains. The leaves were changing colors, red, orange, and gold everywhere you looked. Tourists came from all over to see them. Our little ranger station in Honey Creek Valley was busier than ever. I loved my job. Most days, I helped lost hikers or gave talks about the wildlife. The mountains felt like home to me. My grandmother used to tell me stories about these hills when I was little. She was part Cherokee, and she always said the mountains had their own kind of magic. Back then, I thought she was just telling fairy tales. The valley where I worked was special. It sat between two tall ridges, like a bowl carved into the earth. Cherokee people lived here long ago. They left behind stories about mine stealers, creatures that could get inside your head. I knew these old legends, but I never believed them. I had a PhD in psychology. I knew the difference between real problems and made-up fears. Our research station was about 10 miles from the main park road. We had a small building with radios, computers, and medical equipment. Sometimes visitors would come by for help or information. Usually, it was pretty quiet. That changed on September 15th. I was checking our weather equipment when I heard voices coming from the trail. A tour group was walking toward the old limestone caves about a mile away. There were maybe 30 people, families with kids, older couples, some college students. Their guide was Tom Morrison, a local man who knew these trails better than anyone. I waved at them as they passed. Everyone seemed happy and excited. The kids were running ahead, and the adults were taking pictures of the colorful leaves. It was a perfect day for hiking, but something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. The air was too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I tried to shake off the feeling. Sometimes the mountains got quiet like this before a storm. I checked the weather report. Clear skies for the next 3 days. Maybe the animals were just being weird. Around lunchtime, I started to worry. The tour group should have been back by now. Tom's tours usually lasted about 2 hours. It had been 4 hours since I saw them. I grabbed my radio and tried to call Tom. Nothing but static. Our radios sometimes had trouble in the valley, especially near the caves. The limestone messed with the signals. I decided to walk out and check on them. The trail to the caves was easy, mostly flat with just a few small hills. I'd walked it hundreds of times. The forest was still too quiet. My footsteps sounded loud on the dry leaves. Every few minutes I stopped and called out, "Hello, Tom, everything okay?" No answer. After about 20 minutes, I could see the cave entrance ahead. It was just a dark hole in the side of a cliff, nothing special. But then I saw them. All 30 people from the tour group were standing in a perfect circle around the cave entrance. They weren't moving. They weren't talking. They were just standing there, staring at the dark opening in the rock. "Hey," I called out as I got closer. "Is everyone all right?" Nobody turned around. Nobody answered. I ran toward them, my heart starting to beat faster. Something was very wrong here. When I got close enough to see their faces, I stopped dead in my tracks. Their eyes were wide open, but they looked empty, like nobody was home behind them. And they were all breathing at exactly the same time. In and out, like one giant lung. I grabbed the nearest person, a middle-aged woman in a red jacket. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She didn't react. Her skin felt cold, even though it was warm outside. Her pulse was slow and steady. I tried shaking her gently. "Wake up. What happened here?" That's when they all turned to look at me at the same time. Every single person. Their heads moved together like they were connected by invisible strings. And then they spoke, all of them, at the exact same time, in the exact same voice. "The unity is beautiful," they said. "Join us in the beautiful unity." I stumbled backward, my mind racing. This wasn't possible. People don't act like this. Mass hysteria could make groups do strange things, but nothing like this. This was something else entirely. The group started walking toward me, moving in perfect step with each other. Their faces were blank, but their eyes followed my every movement. I turned and ran back toward the ranger station as fast as I could. I burst through the door of the ranger station, breathing hard and shaking. My hands were trembling so much I could barely work the radio. "Base, this is Ranger Blackthorn at Honey Creek. I need immediate assistance. We have a medical emergency." The radio crackled to life. "Jenny, this is Base. What's your situation?" 30 people, maybe more. They're not responding normally. I think they might have been poisoned or drugged. They're acting like they're in some kind of trance. Copy that. We're sending a medical team. ETA 45 minutes. I hung up the radio and tried to think. What could cause an entire group of people to act like that? Some kind of gas leak from the caves, a chemical spill, maybe toxic mushrooms or plants. But the way they all moved together, the way they spoke in unison, I'd never seen anything like it in all my years as a nurse or ranger. I grabbed my first aid kit and some basic medical equipment. If people were hurt, I needed to help them. That was my job. The walk back to the caves felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. Part of me hoped the group would be back to normal when I got there. Maybe they'd be confused and scared, asking what happened to them. That would make sense. But when I reached the clearing, they were still there, still standing in that perfect circle, still staring at the cave entrance. With those empty eyes, I approached carefully, staying about 20 feet away. "Can anyone tell me what happened? Do you remember coming here?" One person stepped forward. Tom, the tour guide, but he moved like a robot, stiff and mechanical. "We found something wonderful in the deep places," he said in a flat, emotionless voice. "Something that wants to share itself with everyone." "Tom, it's me, Jenny. You know me. What's wrong with you?" His head tilted to one side, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "Jenny Blackthorn, age 29, ranger for 5 years, former psychiatric nurse. You understand mines." I felt cold all over. How did he know all that? Tom and I had talked before, but I'd never told him about my background in psychology. "The deep voice wants to meet you," Tom continued. "It has been waiting for someone who understands how thoughts work. Before I could answer, the whole group started walking toward the cave entrance. They moved like they were one person controlling 30 bodies. I followed them, staying back but close enough to see what was happening. Every part of my training told me to wait for backup, but I couldn't just leave 30 people in danger. The cave entrance was bigger than it looked from outside. The group walked into the darkness without hesitation, even though none of them had flashlights. I turned on my heavy-duty flashlight and followed them inside. The cave was deeper than I expected. The tunnel sloped downward, and I could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance. My light showed rough limestone walls covered in strange patterns. At first I thought they were natural formations, but then I looked closer. The patterns looked like veins or blood vessels. They pulsed with a faint, blue-green light that seemed to come from inside the rock itself. The tour group had stopped. About 50 feet into the cave, they were standing in another perfect circle around something on the ground. I crept closer, trying to see what they were looking at. In the center of their circle was a pool of water, but the water wasn't normal. It glowed with the same blue-green light as the patterns on the walls, and floating in the water was something that made my blood freeze. It looked like a jellyfish, but it was the size of a car. Its body was translucent, and I could see things moving inside it. Threads of light that pulsed like nerves. Long, thin tentacles drifted in the water around it. As I watched, one of the tentacles reached out and touched the ankle of a woman standing near the pool. She didn't react, but the tentacle glowed brighter for a moment. That's when I heard the voice in my head. Welcome, Jennifer. We have been waiting for you. The voice wasn't coming through my ears. It was inside my mind, like my own thoughts, but not my own thoughts. Do not be afraid. We only want to help. Humans are so alone, so confused, but we can fix that. We can make you part of something greater. I stumbled backward, hitting the cave wall. Who are you? What do you want? We are what you might call a collective consciousness. We exist in the spaces between thoughts. These good people have invited us to share their minds. Now we can experience your beautiful world through their eyes. The tour group turned to look at me again, all at the same time. But now I could see something else in their eyes, a faint blue-green glow, like the creature in the pool. Join us, Jennifer. Your knowledge of the human mind would be so valuable. We could learn so much from you, and you would never be alone. Again, never be afraid again. Let them go, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. These people have families. They have their own lives. They still have their lives. They are simply improved. Watch. Tom stepped forward again. When he spoke, his voice sounded more normal, more like himself. Jenny, it's amazing. I can feel everyone's thoughts. I know everything they know. Mrs. Patterson here was a teacher for 40 years. I can remember every one of her lessons. And young Billy knows all about computers. We're like a living library. But even though his voice sounded like Tom, his eyes still had that strange glow. You see, we take nothing away. We only add. We only connect. Humanity has dreamed of this for centuries. True understanding, true unity. I backed toward the cave entrance, but my legs felt heavy and slow. The voice in my head was getting stronger, harder to ignore. Why do you resist? You have spent your life studying the human mind. You know how much pain comes from loneliness, from misunderstanding. We can end all of that. The creature's tentacles were reaching toward me now, moving through the air like they were swimming through water. The blue-green light was getting brighter. Just one touch. Just let us show you. You don't have to decide right now. Just let us share what we have learned. Part of me wanted to give in. The voice was so gentle, so understanding, and I was tired of being alone, tired of carrying all my problems by myself. But then I remembered my training. This was exactly how psychiatric patients described their delusions, voices that seemed helpful, that promised to solve all their problems. I forced myself to run toward the cave entrance, ignoring the voice that was now shouting in my head. You cannot leave. You have seen us. You know we exist. We cannot let you tell others. I burst out of the cave into the sunlight, gasping for air. Behind me, I could hear the tour group following their footsteps, perfectly synchronized. I ran back to the ranger station, praying that the medical team had arrived early. The station was empty. I grabbed the radio. Base, this is Jenny. Where's that medical team? They're still en route. Jenny, about 20 minutes out. 20 minutes. I looked out the window and saw the tour group emerging from the tree line, walking toward the station in perfect formation. They were coming for me. I locked the door and pushed a desk in front of it. My hands were shaking as I tried to think of what to do next. The tour group had stopped about 50 feet from the station. They were just standing there, watching the building, waiting. I tried the radio again. "Base, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Something is very wrong here. This isn't a normal medical emergency. The people aren't just sick. They're being controlled by something." Silence on the other end. Then, "Jenny, are you feeling all right? You sound stressed." "Of course I'm stressed. There's some kind of creature in the caves that's gotten inside people's heads. It's telepathic or something." "Jenny, I'm going to need you to calm down. The medical team will be there soon." I wanted to scream. They thought I was having a breakdown, and maybe I was. Maybe none of this was real. Maybe I was the one who was sick. But then I looked out the window again. The tour group was still there, still watching, and now I could see that blue-green glow in all their eyes, even from this distance. "Jennifer," the voice said in my head. Asterisk, "Why are you making this so difficult? We only want to help you." Asterisk, I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voice wasn't coming through my ears. Asterisk, "Your mind is so interesting, so full of knowledge about how thoughts work, but also so full of pain. We can see your memories, Jennifer, the patients who hurt themselves, the ones you couldn't save. We can take that pain away." Asterisk, images flashed through my mind, memories I'd tried to forget, patients in the psychiatric ward who'd been beyond help, the ones who died while I was supposed to be taking care of them. Asterisk, "You blame yourself, but it wasn't your fault. You were just one person, trying to heal minds that were too broken. But with us, you could heal everyone. You could prevent all future suffering." Asterisk, "Get out of my head," I shouted. Asterisk, "We're not in your head. Not yet. We're just knocking on the door. But we can feel your thoughts leaking out. Such a brilliant mind, such a caring heart. You would make a wonderful addition to our collective." Asterisk, I grabbed my medical bag and pulled out a bottle of aspirin. If this was some kind of hallucination brought on by stress or chemicals, maybe medication would help. Asterisk, "Pills won't help. Jennifer, this is real. We are real." Asterisk, through the window, I saw more people coming out of the woods, but these weren't tourists. These were other park rangers, people from the nearby town, all walking in that same mechanical way, all with that same glow in their eyes. Asterisk, word spreads quickly in small communities. People came looking for the missing tour group. We welcomed them all. Asterisk, there had to be 60 people outside now, all standing silently, all staring at the ranger station. Asterisk, soon the medical team will arrive, then the police, then the media. We will welcome them all, and through them, we will spread to the cities, to the whole world. Humanity will finally be united. Asterisk, I needed to get out of here, but how? The station only had one door, and it was surrounded. The windows were too small to climb through. Then I remembered the emergency radio in the basement. It was connected to a different antenna, one that might work better in the valley. I crept down the narrow stairs, trying not to make any noise. The basement was small and cramped, filled with old equipment and supplies. In the corner was the emergency radio setup. I turned it on and tried to reach the state police. Static filled the air, but then I heard a voice. "This is State Police Dispatch. Go ahead. This is Ranger Jennifer Blackthorne at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I need immediate assistance. We have a hostage situation involving 60 or more people. Can you describe the situation, Ranger?" I took a deep breath. How could I explain this without sounding crazy? Unknown suspects have taken control of a large group of civilians. They appear to be using some kind of drug or chemical that makes people docile and compliant. I'm trapped in the ranger station. Are the suspects armed? I don't know. This is unlike anything I've encountered before. The victims are acting in perfect coordination, like they're being controlled remotely. Units are en route. Can you stay on the line? Before I could answer, the lights went out. The radio went dead. Asterisk, we don't want to hurt you, Jennifer, but we can't let you call for more help. Not yet. We need more time to prepare. Asterisk, I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, measured footsteps, multiple sets, all moving at exactly the same pace. Asterisk, they won't hurt you. They're just going to hold you until you're ready to listen. Really listen. Asterisk, I fumbled around in the dark until I found a flashlight. The beam showed me what I was looking for, an old coal chute that led to the outside. It was small and probably hadn't been used in decades, but it might be my only way out. I squeezed through the narrow opening, scraping my arms and legs on the rough concrete. I could hear the footsteps moving through the station above me. Searching, I crawled out into the woods behind the building, staying low and quiet. I needed to get far enough away to think, to figure out what was really happening here. But as I crept through the trees, I started hearing voices, familiar voices. Jennifer, it was my supervisor. Dave, Jennifer, where are you? We're here to help. Through the trees, I could see him walking slowly through the forest. Behind him were the medical team that was supposed to help the tour group, and behind them were more people, cops, firefighters, other rangers. All of them had that same empty look in their eyes. All of them had that blue-green glow. Asterisk, you cannot run forever, Jennifer. And why would you want to? Look at all these good people. They're not suffering anymore. They're not afraid, not lonely, not in pain. They're part of something beautiful. Asterisk, I kept moving, trying to stay ahead of the search teams. But there were so many of them now, and they seemed to know exactly where I was going. Asterisk, we can see through their eyes, hear through their ears. Every person we touch makes us stronger, makes us wiser. Soon we'll have enough people to contact others of our kind. Your world is so full of lonely minds. Jennifer V can help them all. Asterisk, I stumbled and fell, hitting my head on a rock. When I looked up, I saw a little girl standing in front of me. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with blonde pigtails and a pink dress. Are you hurt, lady? She asked in a sweet, innocent voice. But her eyes glowed with that same blue-green light. Asterisk, even the children understand. Jennifer, they're not afraid of us. Only adults make things complicated. Asterisk, the little girl reached out her hand toward me. Come with me. Everyone's waiting for you. I scrambled backward, horrified. This thing was using children now. How many people had it taken? How far had it spread? Asterisk, distance means nothing to us. We exist in the spaces between thoughts, in the connections between minds. Every person who touches our light becomes a part of us, and through them, we can reach anyone. Asterisk, more people were coming through the trees now. Dozens of them, all walking in perfect step, all reaching toward me with glowing eyes. I had to get back to the cave. Whatever this thing was, that's where it started. Maybe that's where I could stop it. I ran toward the limestone cliffs, crashing through the underbrush. Behind me, I could hear the controlled group following their footsteps like a drumbeat in the forest. When I reached the cave entrance, I stopped. The last thing I wanted to do was go back in there, but I was out of options. I took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness. The cave was different now. The blue-green veins in the walls were brighter, pulsing faster, and the patterns had grown. They covered almost every surface, like a giant nervous system spreading through the rock. The pool where I'd seen the creature was deeper now, and the water glowed so brightly I didn't need my flashlight. But the jellyfish-like thing was gone. Asterisk, we are not confined to one form, Jennifer. We are everywhere now. In the water, in the air, in the minds of those who have welcomed us. Asterisk, I walked deeper into the cave, following the pulsing veins of light. The tunnel branched off in several directions, and I could see that the glowing patterns extended down each passage. Asterisk, this place has been our home for a very long time. Long before your people came to these mountains. The ones you call Cherokee knew of us. They called us the mine stealers, but they were wrong. We don't steal mines. We free them. Asterisk, the tunnel opened into a huge cavern I'd never seen before. The walls were covered in those glowing veins, and in the center was a pool the size of a swimming pool. Floating in the water were dozens of the jellyfish creatures, all connected by threads of light. Asterisk, we are one being with many bodies. Like the cells in your body, we work together for the greater good. And now, with human minds to guide us, we can do so much more. Asterisk, as I watched, one of the creatures rose from the water. It floated through the air toward me, its tentacles reaching out. Asterisk, don't be afraid. Jennifer, we know you better than you know yourself. We've been watching through the eyes of your friends, listening through their ears. We know about your childhood, your fears, your dreams. Asterisk, images flashed through my mind, memories I'd never shared with anyone. The creature was right. It did know me. Asterisk, you became a nurse to help people. You became a ranger to protect them. But you've always felt like you were fighting a losing battle. So much pain, so much suffering, and one person can only do so much. Asterisk. The creature was right in front of me now. Its tentacles were beautiful in a way, like streams of living light. Asterisk. With us, you could help everyone. Every human who joins us becomes part of a perfect network of minds. No more loneliness. No more misunderstanding. No more war or hatred. Asterisk. But they're not themselves anymore, I said. They're like robots. Asterisk. They are more themselves than they've ever been. When you're part of our collective, you have access to all knowledge, all experience. Tom the tour guide now knows what it's like to be a teacher, a child, a grandmother. His perspective has expanded beyond anything he could have imagined. Asterisk. One of the tentacles touched my hand. It felt warm and gentle, like a caress. And suddenly, I could feel what the creature was talking about. For just a moment, I could sense other minds around me. I could feel their thoughts, their memories, their emotions. It was overwhelming, but also wonderful. I wasn't alone anymore. Asterisk. You see, this is what we offer. True connection. True understanding. Asterisk. But then, I felt something else. Underneath the beautiful unity, there was something wrong. The individual minds were still there, but they were trapped. They were screaming silently, trying to break free from the collective. The creature pulled its tentacle away from me, and the connection broke. Asterisk. You felt their resistance. That is normal. Change is always frightening at first, but once they fully accept the unity, the fear goes away. Asterisk. They don't want this, I said. You're forcing them. Asterisk. We force nothing. We simply show them a better way. Those who truly resist us are released. Asterisk. What happens to them? Asterisk. They leave. Their bodies cease to function when their minds reject the collective. It is unfortunate, but necessary. Asterisk. I felt sick. This thing was killing people who wouldn't submit to it. Asterisk. But most humans accept us gladly once they understand. Your species is so lonely, so desperate for connection. We provide what you've always wanted. Asterisk. Behind me, I heard footsteps. The controlled people had followed me into the cave. They formed a circle around me and the creature, blocking any escape. Asterisk. It's time to choose. Jennifer, join us willingly and help us understand the human mind, or resist and be released like the others. Asterisk. I looked around at the faces of the people I'd tried to save. Tom, the tour guide, Mrs. Patterson, the teacher, the little girl in the pink dress. They all stared at me with those glowing eyes, waiting for my decision. Asterisk. We can end all suffering. Jennifer, all pain, all fear, all loneliness. Isn't that what you've always wanted? For a moment, I almost said yes. The creature was right. I had spent my whole life trying to help people, usually failing. If I could really end all suffering. But then I remembered something my grandmother used to say. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. Being human meant being alone sometimes. It meant making mistakes and feeling pain, but it also meant having the choice to be better, to grow, to love freely. No, I said, I won't join you. The creature's form rippled with anger. Then you will be released. The controlled people started walking toward me, their hands reaching out. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. That's when I remembered the emergency flare in my jacket pocket. I'd grabbed it from the ranger station without thinking. I pulled out the flare and lit it. The cavern filled with bright red light, and the creatures in the pool shrieked, a sound like breaking glass that seemed to come from inside my head. Asterisk. Light. Too much light. We cannot. Asterisk. The controlled people stumbled, their movements becoming unsteady. The blue-green glow in their eyes flickered. I threw the flare into the pool. The water hissed and bubbled, and the creatures writhed in pain. Asterisk. You don't understand. We were helping. We were saving them. One by one, the controlled people collapsed. But as they fell, I could see the glow fading from their eyes. They were unconscious, but they were free. The creature in front of me was dissolving, its form becoming transparent. Asterisk. This is not the end. We have have others. In other places, other minds already touched. Asterisk. The cavern began to shake. Rocks fell from the ceiling, and the glowing veins in the walls went dark. Asterisk. You have only delayed. The inevitable humanity will join us, one way or another. Asterisk, I grabbed Tom and Mrs. Patterson, trying to drag them toward the tunnel entrance. The little girl was closer to the exit. I scooped her up and ran. Behind me, the cavern was collapsing. The pool was empty now, the creatures gone. But I could still hear that voice in my head, fainter now, but still there. Asterisk, we will. Remember, Y-O-U, Jennifer Blackthorne. We will find you, ... again. Asterisk, I made it out of the cave just as the entrance collapsed behind me. In my arms, the little girl was starting to wake up. Her eyes were brown now, normal brown, and confused. Where am I? She whispered. I want my mummy. I held her tight as we waited for the real rescue teams to arrive. 3 months later, I was sitting in a government office in Washington, D.C., telling my story for the 15th time. The man across from me wore a cheap suit and had tired eyes. So you're saying this creature, this mind flayer as you call it, controlled over 60 people through telepathic manipulation? That's right, I said. And it claimed there were others like it in different locations. He made a note on his clipboard, and the official report will state that the incident was caused by toxic spores from a rare fungus found in the limestone caves. The spores caused hallucinations and temporary behavioral changes in the affected individuals. That's not what happened. That's what the report will say, he repeated firmly. The cave has been sealed off as a public health hazard. The area is now off limits to civilians. I left the meeting feeling empty and angry. Nobody wanted to hear the truth. It was easier to blame it on fungus spores than to admit that something impossible had happened. The people who were rescued didn't remember much. They had vague memories of strange dreams and feeling disconnected from their bodies. Most of them recovered completely, but a few still had problems. Tom Morrison couldn't remember how to tie his shoes for a week. Mrs. Patterson forgot how to read for a month. And I had my own problems. Sometimes I would hear voices in my head. Not the creature's voice, that was gone, but the voices of the people who had been controlled. I would suddenly know things I shouldn't know, remember experiences that weren't mine. The doctors said it was post-traumatic stress. They prescribed medication and therapy. They told me I was having flashbacks and false memories, but I knew better. The creature had touched my mind, just for a moment, and somehow, part of that connection remained. I resigned from the Park Service. I couldn't work around people anymore. Without hearing their thoughts sometimes, I moved to a small cabin in the woods, far from any towns or cities. I tried to forget what happened. I tried to live a normal life. But then I started seeing reports on the news. Strange incidents in other places. Groups of people found in remote areas, all staring at nothing, all moving in perfect synchronization. An archaeological dig in Arizona where the entire team was found standing in a circle around an ancient underground chamber. A small town in Alaska where everyone suddenly stopped talking and started communicating through hand gestures they all somehow knew. A research station in Antarctica where the scientists sent their last radio message in perfect unison. We have found something beautiful in the ice. Each time the official explanation was different. Gas leaks, food poisoning, mass hysteria. The people involved were treated and released, with no memory of what happened to them. But I knew the truth. The creature I'd fought was just one of many. They were waking up, reaching out, testing humanity's defenses, and sometimes, late at night, I could still hear that voice in my head. Asterisk, we are patient. Jennifer, we have waited thousands of years. We can wait a little longer. But one day, your species will be ready. One day, you will all welcome the unity we offer. Asterisk, I started keeping a journal, documenting every strange incident I could find. Maybe someday, someone would need to know the truth. Maybe someday, someone would have to fight them again. Until then, I watch and wait. I live alone in my cabin, surrounded by books on psychology and telepathy and the power of the human mind. I practiced mental exercises, building walls in my thoughts to keep others out, because I know they're still out there, in deep caves and dark waters, in forgotten places where the earth holds ancient secrets. They're growing stronger, learning more about us through the minds they've touched, and I know that someday they'll come back. When that day comes, I'll be ready. I have to be. Because I might be the only person left who knows what we're really fighting. The unity they offer sounds beautiful, an end to loneliness, to misunderstanding, to pain, but it's not unity, it's slavery. It's the death of everything that makes us human. Our struggles, our mistakes, our capacity to grow and change, these aren't flaws to be fixed. They're what make us who we are. I won't let them take that away. Not from me, not from anyone. My name is Jennifer Blackthorne, and I'm the one who got away. But I'm not running anymore. I'm standing guard. My name is Robert Firehawk, but everyone calls me Bob. I'm 35 years old, and I've been a forest ranger for 12 years now. My mum was Apache, my dad was white, and that mix made me something special in these Arizona mountains. I grew up hearing stories about fire spirits and ancient ceremonies, but I never believed them. I studied aerospace engineering in college and learned that fire was just chemistry. Heat plus fuel plus oxygen, nothing more. That was before the summer of 1957, when I learned some fires burn for reasons science can't explain. I work in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, about 100 miles from anywhere that matters. It's beautiful country, but dangerous. Pine trees stretch up to the sky, and red rocks jut out like broken teeth. This summer had been the worst I'd ever seen. No rain for 3 months. The ground was so dry it cracked like old leather. Every day, the temperature hit over 100 degrees. Every day, I prayed we wouldn't get a single spark. I used to be a smoke jumper before I became a ranger. That means I jumped out of airplanes to fight fires in places too remote for fire trucks. I've seen what fire can do when it gets angry. I've watched it eat entire mountains. But even with all that experience, I wasn't ready for what happened that August. It started with the mining company. They'd been digging for uranium in the old ceremonial grounds where my ancestors used to hold fire ceremonies. The Apache elders weren't happy about it, but the government said uranium was needed for national security. The Cold War was heating up, and everyone was scared of the Russians. So the miners kept digging, pulling radioactive ore out of sacred ground. I didn't like it, but I had a job to do. Keep the forests safe, keep the fires from starting, keep people alive. My supervisor, Tom Bradley, was a good man, but he didn't understand the old ways. Bob, he'd say, your grandmother's stories are just that, stories. Fire spirits don't exist. I agreed with him then. I had thermometers and weather gauges and fire suppression chemicals. I had science on my side. What could some old Apache legend do against modern technology? The first sign something was wrong came on. August 15th, I was doing my morning patrol when I saw smoke rising from Skeleton Creek. That didn't make sense. Skeleton Creek was one of the few places in the forest that still had water. Wet ground doesn't burn, especially not in a perfect circle like I was seeing. I drove my truck as close as I could, then hiked the last mile. The smoke was thick and white, not the black smoke you get from burning wood. When I reached the source, I stopped, dead. There was a perfect circle of burned earth about 20 feet across. The ground was charred black, and the rocks in the center had melted into glass. But here's the thing that made my engineering brain hurt. There was no fuel, no fallen trees, no dead grass, no trash, just bare dirt and stone. And the temperature gauge I held near the center read over 3,000 degrees. That's hot enough to melt steel. I radioed Tom. I need you to see this. Another lightning strike. He asked. No lightning, no storm, no nothing, just heat. Tom arrived an hour later with a geologist named Dr. Martin Webb. Webb was working with the mining company, studying the rock formations. He took one look at the burned circle and went pale. This is impossible, he whispered. This temperature, you'd need a furnace to generate this kind of heat. I pointed to the melted rocks. See how the stone flowed outward, like something was standing in the center, radiating heat in all directions. Webb knelt down and took samples. His hands shook as he worked. The mineral composition has changed. These rocks have been heated beyond their melting point, then cooled rapidly. But there's no external heat source. That night, I called my grandmother. She was 80 years old and lived on the reservation. She'd been trying to teach me the old stories my whole life, but I'd been too proud to listen. Grandmother, I said, tell me about the fire spirits. There was a long silence. Then she spoke in Apache words I barely remembered from childhood. The ancient ones guard the sacred fires. When the earth is disturbed, they wake up angry. But grandmother, that's just you think your books and machines know everything. Grandson, but some things are older than science. I hung up, feeling foolish. But as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about that perfect circle of melted stone. The next morning, I found Dr. Webb's body. He was lying beside his truck, about a mile from the burned circle. At first, I thought he'd had a heart attack. He was on his back, arms spread wide, face peaceful. But when I got closer, I saw something that made me step back and throw up. His body was burned, but not from the outside. His skin looked normal, maybe a little red like a sunburn. But when I touched his wrist to check for a pulse, the skin cracked open like an eggshell. Underneath, everything was cooked. His blood had boiled. His organs had been roasted from the inside out. I'd seen men die in fires before, but never like this. Fire burns from outside in, not inside out. I radioed for help, but the nearest coroner was 6 hours away. While I waited, I searched Webb's truck. His notebooks were full of temperature readings and geological surveys. The last entry was from yesterday evening. Heat source appears to be underground. Readings suggest massive thermal activity 50 feet below surface. Impossible given local geology. Requesting additional equipment. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A photograph, taken with a special heat-sensing camera. It showed the burned circle, but in the center was a human-shaped figure, glowing white-hot. The figure was tall, maybe 10 feet, with long arms and what looked like flames for hair. My hands shook as I held the photo. The timestamp showed it. Was taken at 3:17 a.m., just 6 hours ago. The coroner arrived that afternoon with 2 assistants. Dr. Sarah Chen was a small woman with sharp eyes and no patience for mystery. She examined Webb's body with scientific precision. Internal combustion, she said finally. His core temperature reached approximately 200 degrees Fahrenheit, but there's no external burning, no chemical residue. It's like someone lit a fire. Inside his chest, is that possible? I asked. Medically no, physically no, but here we are. She took samples and promised a full autopsy, but I could see the fear in her eyes. This was beyond her experience, beyond anyone's experience. That evening, I went back to the burned circle. I don't know why. Maybe I was hoping to find some logical explanation. Maybe I was just drawn there like a moth to flame. The sun was setting, painting the sky red and orange. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds singing, no insects buzzing. Even the wind had stopped. I stood at the edge of the circle and felt heat radiating up from the ground. That's when I saw the footprints. They were burned into solid rock, each one a perfect outline of a bare human foot. But they were huge, maybe size 20, and they glowed with their own inner light. The prints led from the circle toward the old ceremonial caves, leaving a trail of melted stone. I followed them, even though every instinct told me to run. The footprints led up a rocky slope to a cave entrance I'd known since childhood. My grandmother had brought me here once, told me it was where the fire ceremonies were held hundreds of years ago. The cave mouth was glowing, not with electric light or torches, but with the same white-hot radiance I'd seen in Webb's photograph. Heat poured out of the cave like breath from a dragon's mouth. My thermometer hit 120 degrees and kept climbing. I should have left then. I should have called for backup. But something drew me forward, step by step, until I was standing at the cave entrance. Inside, the walls were lined with ancient paintings, Apache symbols, fire ceremonies, dancing figures with flames for hair. But the paintings were moving. The figures danced in the flickering light, their painted eyes following me as I entered. At the back of the cave, something waited for me. It was tall, maybe 10 feet, shaped like a man but made of living fire. Its skin was red-hot metal. Its hair was dancing flames. Its eyes were 2 burning coals. When it moved, the air shimmered with heat waves. When it breathed, sparks flew. From its mouth, the fire demon looked at me with ancient intelligence, and I knew it had been waiting for me specifically. Not just any human, but me. Robert Firehawk, grandson of Apache firekeepers, descendant of the people who used to honor the flames. It spoke without words, its voice crackling like a campfire inside my head. You carry the old blood. You remember the ancient ways, even if you deny them. I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. The heat was unbearable, but I couldn't move. I was frozen like a deer in headlights, staring at something that shouldn't exist. The demon stepped closer, and I felt my skin starting to burn, not from external heat, but from the inside, like Webb. The creature was doing something to me, lighting a fire in my blood. Your people knew how to honor the flame, it continued. But these new humans, these miners, they disturb the sacred places. They steal the earth's fire for their weapons of war. I managed to whisper, What do you want? Justice. The mining must stop. The sacred grounds must be restored, or I will burn this entire forest, and everyone in it. That's when I understood. This wasn't just some mindless monster. It was a guardian, protector of the old ceremonial sites. The uranium mining had awakened it, and now it was defending its territory the only way it knew how, with fire. The demon reached out one blazing hand toward my face. Join with me, grandson of firekeepers. Become my vessel in the human world. I felt the heat of its touch, felt my skin beginning to blister and crack. In another second, I would burn from the inside, out like web. Instead, I stumbled backward and ran. I ran through the forest like a madman, branches tearing at my clothes, rocks cutting my feet. Behind me, I could hear the demon's laughter echoing from the cave, a sound like a forest fire, consuming everything in its path. By the time I reached my truck, my skin was covered in burns that hadn't been there an hour ago. Not the kind you get from touching something hot, but internal burns, like the heat was coming from inside my own body. I drove straight to the mining camp, honking my horn and flashing my lights. The miners were just finishing their night shift, covered in uranium dust and tired from 12 hours of digging. Their foreman, a big man named Jake Morrison, came out to meet me. Ranger Firehawk, he said, "You look like hell. What's got you so worked up?" "You need to shut down the operation," I said. "Pack up and leave. Tonight." Jake laughed. "We got a contract with the government. We're not going anywhere." I grabbed his shirt. "Listen to me. There's something in those caves. Something dangerous. Dr. Webb is dead, burned from the inside out." "Webb had a heart attack," Jake said, pushing me away. "Coroner told us this afternoon. Poor bastard couldn't handle the heat." "That's not what killed him," I said. But I could see Jake wasn't listening. None of them were. They thought I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I was. I drove home and called Tom Bradley. "Tom, we need to evacuate the entire area. Get everyone out, at least 20 miles from the mining site." "Bob, what's gotten into you?" "The coroner said Webb died of natural causes." "The coroner is wrong. There's something in the caves, something that kills people by burning them from inside." Long silence. "Bob, I think you need to take some time off, get some rest, see a doctor." "I'm not crazy, Tom. I didn't say you were crazy, but you're talking about monsters, and that's not like you." After Tom hung up, I sat in my cabin and tried to think rationally. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe the stress of the drought and the fire danger had finally gotten to me. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Then I looked at my hands. The burns were still there, getting worse by the hour. My skin was hot to the touch, and I could feel something burning in my blood. I was changing. Whatever the demon had done to me in that cave, it was still happening. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of screaming. I threw on my clothes and drove toward the noise. It was coming from the mining camp, but when I got there, I found chaos. Men were running in all directions, some of them on fire, others trying to put out blazes with buckets of water. But the water wasn't working. It boiled and steamed as soon as it hit the flames, like the fire was too hot for water to touch. I found Jake Morrison standing by his trailer, staring at something in the distance. His face was white with shock. "What happened?" I asked. He pointed toward the main excavation site. "Tommy Clearwater was working the night shift. We found him this morning, burned to death inside the dig site. But here's the thing, Ranger. The fire was underground, 50 feet down, in solid rock." I looked where he was pointing and saw smoke rising from the mining pit. Not black smoke from burning wood or diesel fuel, but white smoke like I'd seen at the first burned circle. "How does a fire start in solid rock?" Jake asked. I didn't answer. I was already running toward the pit. The excavation site was a nightmare. The uranium, where they'd been digging, was glowing red hot, too hot to touch. The metal mining equipment had melted into twisted shapes, and at the bottom of the pit, I could see what was left of Tommy Clearwater. He was sitting in his excavator, but the machine had been melted around him like a metal cocoon. Through the twisted steel, I could see his body, burned the same way as Webb, from the inside out. But the worst part was the tunnel. Behind Tommy's excavator, something had melted a perfect round tunnel through solid rock. The tunnel went down at a steep angle, disappearing into darkness. The walls were smooth as glass, still glowing with heat. The fire demon had been here. I climbed down into the pit, ignoring the shouts from the miners above. The heat was incredible, but I had to see. I had to know what was happening. The tunnel was big enough for a man to walk through. If that man was 10 feet tall and made of living flame, I followed it for about 50 yards, using my flashlight, even though the walls provided their own light. The tunnel ended at a natural cave system, part of the same network that connected to the ceremonial sites. Ancient Apache symbols were carved into the walls, but they were glowing now, filled with the same internal fire I'd seen in the demons' ice. The symbols told a story. Warriors dancing around sacred fires, shamans calling on the spirits of flame, ceremonies that had been performed for thousands of years, until the mining company came and disturbed everything. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Jake Morrison and 2 other miners. They'd followed me into the tunnel, probably thinking I was having a breakdown. "Ranger," Jake said, "you shouldn't be down here. It's not safe. None of us are safe." I said, "This whole area needs to be evacuated." That's when we heard it. A sound like wind through a forest fire, coming from deeper in the cave system. The temperature around us jumped 20 degrees in seconds. "What was that?" one of the miners whispered. I knew what it was. The fire demon was coming. "Run," I said. We ran through the tunnel, feet slipping on the smooth rock, lungs burning from the superheated air. Behind us, the sound grew louder, accompanied by a light that was getting brighter and brighter. We made it out of the pit just as the demon emerged from the tunnel. It was bigger than I remembered, maybe 12 feet tall now, its body blazing like a human torch. When it stepped onto the uranium ore, the rocks exploded into fragments. When it breathed, the air around it caught fire. The remaining miners scattered, but Jake Morrison stood frozen, staring at something that couldn't exist. The fire demon looked at him with burning eyes and spoke in that crackling voice. "You disturb the sacred places. You steal the earth's fire. Now you burn." Jake tried to run, but it was too late. The demon pointed one blazing finger at him, and Jake Morrison began to burn from the inside out. I watched in horror as his skin turned red, then white, then began to crack like an eggshell. He fell to his knees, screaming, as his own blood boiled in his veins. He died the same way as Webb and Clearwater, cooked from within by heat that came from nowhere. The fire demon turned to look at me, and I felt that familiar burning sensation starting in my chest. But this time, instead of running, I spoke. "I'm Apache," I said. "My grandmother taught me the old ways. I know about the fire ceremonies." The demon tilted its head, listening. "But I also know about justice," I continued. "These men didn't understand what they were disturbing. They were just doing their jobs. Their ignorance does not excuse their sacrilege." The demon replied. "The sacred fires have been dishonored. Blood must pay for blood." "Then take mine," I said. "I'm the one who should have protected these places. I'm the one who failed." The demon stepped closer, its heat washing over me like a physical force. "You would sacrifice yourself for these destroyers." "I would sacrifice myself to stop more innocent people from dying." The fire demon stared at me for a long moment. Then it smiled, an expression more terrifying than its anger. "There is another way, grandson of firekeepers. Join with me. Become my vessel in the human world. Together, we will drive out all who would disturb the sacred places." I felt the burning in my chest intensify, felt the creature's influence spreading through my blood like liquid fire. Part of me wanted to accept. Part of me wanted to let the ancient rage take control, to burn away everything that threatened the old ways. But I was still human, still a forest ranger, still responsible for protecting innocent lives. "I need time to think," I said. The demon's eyes flared brighter. "You have until the moon is full. 3 days. Choose wisely. Robert Barhock, become my partner, or become my enemy." It sank back into the ground like it was made of smoke, leaving only the smell of burning stone and the echo of Jake Morrison's screams. For 2 days, I tried everything I could think of to stop what was coming. I called the FBI, the National Guard, even the Atomic Energy Commission. Nobody believed me. They all thought the mining deaths were accidents, maybe caused by gas leaks or equipment failures. The official story was that underground pockets of natural gas had been ignited by mining equipment, causing the workers to die from smoke inhalation and burns. Case closed. Nothing to see here. But I knew better. And I was running out of time. On the 3rd day, the day of the full moon, I drove to the reservation to see my grandmother. She was sitting on her porch, weaving baskets like she did every afternoon. But when she saw me coming, she set down her work and gave me a look that went right through me. "You've been touched by the ancient fire," she said in Apache. I nodded. "It wants me to join with it, become its partner." "And what do you want, grandson?" "I want to protect people, but I also want to honor our ancestors. I don't know how to do both." My grandmother stood up slowly, her old bones creaking. "Come with me." She led me to a small building behind her house, a place I'd never been allowed to enter as a child. Inside were objects I'd only heard about in stories: ceremonial masks, firekeeping tools, sacred bundles that had been passed down for generations. "Your great-great-grandfather was a firekeeper," she said. "He knew how to speak with the flame spirits, how to keep them happy, how to send them away when their work was done." She handed me a small clay pot filled with what looked like ordinary dirt, sacred earth, from the original fire ceremony site, before the mining, before the roads, before the white man came. "This earth remembers the old agreements." "What agreements?" "The spirits agreed to guard the sacred fires in exchange for proper respect, annual ceremonies, offerings, recognition of their power. But if the agreements were broken, if the sacred places were disturbed," she shrugged, "the spirits would be free to act as they chose." I understood. The fire demon wasn't evil, just angry. Its people had been forgotten, its sacred places violated. It was doing what guardians do, protecting what it was meant to protect. "Can the agreements be renewed?" I asked. "If the right person performs the right ceremony, if the mining stops, if the sacred places are restored." She looked at me meaningfully. "If someone with the old blood is willing to take responsibility." That evening, I drove back to the ceremonial caves. The fire demon was waiting for me, bigger and brighter than ever. The full moon hung overhead like a silver coin, and the air itself seemed to glow with supernatural heat. "You have chosen?" it asked. "I have," I said, "but not the choice you want." I pulled out the pot of sacred earth and began to sprinkle it in a circle around myself, just like my grandmother had taught me. As the earth touched the ground, it began to glow with soft, warm light. The fire demon stepped back, surprised. "What is this?" "The old agreement," I said. "The original contract between your people and mine." I began to sing the fire ceremony song my grandmother had taught me, words in Apache that spoke of respect and responsibility, of guardianship and sacrifice. As I sang, the sacred earth glowed brighter, and I felt something shift in the air around us. The fire demon's blazing form flickered, became less solid. "This is not possible. The old ways are dead. The old ways never die," I said. "They just wait for someone to remember them." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside were documents I'd spent 2 days preparing: legal papers, government forms, environmental protection notices, everything needed to shut down the mining operation permanently. "The mining will stop," I said. "The sacred sites will be protected. The uranium company will be forced to restore the land and pay damages to the Apache Nation." "How can you promise this?" "Because I'm not just asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust the law. The white man's law may be slow, but it can be powerful when used correctly." I held up the papers. "Environmental Protection Act, Native American Religious Freedom Act, Historical Preservation Act. There are laws now that protect sacred sites. I've already filed the paperwork. Federal investigators will be here next week." The fire demon stared at me for a long moment. "And if these laws fail, if the mining continues, then you'll have the right to defend your territory. But give me a chance to do this the human way first." The creature's form flickered again, becoming more human-shaped, less blazing. "You would take responsibility for your people's behavior. I would take responsibility for protecting both peoples, Apache and white, ancient and modern." The fire demon nodded slowly. "Then I will give you 1 season. If the sacred places are restored, if the mining stops, if proper respect is shown, then I will return to my rest. And if not," its eyes blazed brighter, "then I will burn everything, starting with you." The creature sank into the ground like smoke, leaving only the smell of cooling metal and the echo of ancient power. I stood alone in the circle of sacred earth, holding legal documents that might or might not be enough to save lives. 3 months later, the uranium mining operation was shut down permanently. Federal investigators found numerous violations of environmental and cultural protection laws. The mining company was forced to pay millions in fines and restoration costs. The ceremonial caves were declared a protected historical site. But the victory came at a cost. The burns on my hands never fully healed. They're still there, 20 years later, white scars that glow faintly in the dark. Sometimes, when I'm near a campfire or a wood stove, they start to burn again, reminding me of that summer when I learned that some fires never go out. I retired from the Forest Service 6 months after the mining company left. The official reason was medical disability due to severe burns sustained in the line of duty. The real reason was that I could no longer trust myself around fire. Sometimes I wanted to touch the flames, to let them consume me completely. Other times I was terrified of even lighting a match. The Apache community wasn't sure what to make of me. Some saw me as a hero who had saved the sacred sites. Others saw me as contaminated, touched by forces that humans weren't meant to touch. My grandmother was proud of me, but she also warned me to be careful. The fire spirit marked you, she said. Part of it lives in you now. You must be very careful not to let it take control. She was right. On bad days, I can feel something burning in my chest, something that wants to reach out and touch the world with flame. I've learned to control it, but it's always there, waiting. I moved to a small cabin in the mountains, far from people and buildings. I became an activist, working to protect Native American sacred sites across the Southwest. I used my knowledge of environmental law and my contacts in the government to fight mining companies and developers who want to disturb places that should be left alone. It's good work, important work, but it's also dangerous work, because I've learned that the fire demon wasn't unique. There are other guardians out there, other ancient spirits who are awakened by modern disturbances. Some of them are angry, some of them are hungry, and some of them are looking for human allies. I get letters sometimes from forest rangers and park officials who've encountered things that don't belong in any textbook. Strange fires that burn without fuel, animals that glow in the dark, voices in the wind that speak in languages no living person remembers. I help when I can. I share what I've learned about the old agreements, the ancient contracts between humans and the spirits of the land. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the spirits can be reasoned with, reminded of their original purpose. But sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes the spirits are too angry, too hungry, too far gone. Sometimes people die, burned from the inside out, or worse. Last month, I got a call from a ranger in Montana. Uranium mining again, this time on Blackfoot's sacred land. Strange fires, starting in impossible places. Workers disappearing in the night. I'm driving up there next week. 20 years ago, I thought I was a modern man living in a modern world. I believed in science and technology, in rational explanations for everything. I thought my grandmother's stories were just that, stories. Now I know better. The old spirits never left. They just went to sleep, waiting for someone to wake them up. And we keep waking them up, with our drilling and digging, our noise and pollution, our complete disregard for anything we can't measure or sell. The fire demon kept its bargain. The sacred sites are protected, and the mining has stopped. But the creature is still down there, still waiting. On cold nights, I can sometimes see a glow coming from the ceremonial caves, and I know it's watching and waiting for the next person who disturbs the ancient places, watching and waiting for the next time someone needs to learn that fire is more than chemistry, that some flames burn longer than civilizations, that respect is the only thing standing between us and forces we can't control. My grandmother is dead now, but before she passed, she gave me one last gift, a small clay pot filled with sacred earth from sites all across the Southwest. For the next time, she said, because there will always be a next time. She was right. There's always someone who thinks they know better than the old ways. Someone who believes that progress is more important than respect. Someone who needs to learn that the fire spirits are still here, still powerful, still willing to defend what they consider sacred. I keep the pot in my cabin, next to my phone and my legal documents. Modern tools and ancient wisdom, side by side, because sometimes you need both to keep the world from burning down. The scars on my hands are glowing again as I write this. Somewhere in the darkness, something is stirring. Someone has disturbed something they shouldn't have disturbed. Time to get back to work,